All right, get ready for one of the weirdest, most fascinating stories in all of biology. It's basically a true crime story, but our main culprit is a single-celled microbe. And the crime scene? It's the brain of a rat. We're going to investigate how this tiny organism pulls off one of nature's most unbelievable heists, total mind control.
And believe me, that is not an exaggeration. The central mystery we're unpacking here is how a microscopic parasite can completely short-circuit millions of years of evolution and make its host not just fearless, but actually attracted to its number one predator. It really does sound like something out of science fiction, but it's a very real puzzle that scientists are still trying to solve.
So meet our prime suspect, Toxoplasma gondii. This little guy is a parasite with a very specific, single-minded goal. You see, to complete its life cycle and reproduce, it absolutely has to get into the gut of a cat. Any cat, really. A house cat, a tiger, you name it. The only problem is it often ends up in the wrong place first, like inside a mouse or a rat. So it has to engineer a way to get its current home eaten by its dream home.
And this is where the mind control really kicks in. You know, rodents have this deep, hardwired instinct to avoid the smell of cat urine. It's survival 101. But when they get infected with toxoplasma, that fear just vanishes. And what's even crazier is that some of them actually become attracted to the smell. They're drawn to the one thing that should be screaming danger, making them incredibly easy prey. The parasite literally turns them into a willing delivery vehicle for its own life cycle. So how on earth does it pull this off? Let's investigate the leading theories.
Okay, our first suspect is probably the most straightforward idea. Let's call it the brain invasion theory. The thinking here is that the parasite is like a home invader. It physically gets into the brain and starts breaking things in all the right or, wrong places.
The logic is pretty simple, right? If you want to get rid of fear, you go right to the source. And in the brain, a key part of that fear circuit is the amygdala. So the theory goes that Toxoplasma must be drawn to these areas, forming little cysts and causing inflammation that just messes with the brain's fear-on switch.
And wow, this image really shows you the parasite definitely gets into the brain. You can see it right there. Those little clusters, those are Toxoplasma cysts, just hanging out in the brain tissue of a mouse, surrounded by immune cells. So, at first glance, this brain invasion theory looks pretty solid. The culprit is at the scene of the crime.
But, of course, there's a twist. When scientists actually mapped out where these cysts were, they weren't all clustered in the amygdala like you'd expect. Nope, they were just kind of scattered everywhere, almost randomly. And here's the real kicker. Other studies found that the weird behavior, that fatal attraction, can actually stick around even after most of the parasite cysts have been cleared out with medicine. So just being there physically, well, that can't be the whole story. So, with our first theory on shaky ground, we move on to suspect number 2. Maybe it's not about a physical attack at all. Maybe it's a chemical one, a case of neurological sabotage.
This theory looks at it from a totally different angle. What if Toxoplasma doesn't need to be in a specific spot? What if it could just pump out a chemical that affects the whole brain? The chemical in question here is dopamine. You've probably heard of it. It's famous for its role in reward and motivation, basically telling the brain what it should move towards. The idea is that the parasite turns itself into a little dopamine factory, warping the rodent's entire motivation system.
And the evidence for this is pretty compelling. First, when scientists looked at the parasite's own DNA, they found it has genes that are strikingly similar to the ones mammals use to make dopamine. Second, the cysts themselves are found to contain high levels of dopamine. And maybe the most convincing part, if you give infected mice drugs that block dopamine, that fatal attraction to cat smells can actually be reversed. It really does seem like a slam dunk case.
But then, another twist in the case. Scientists got clever and created a mutant version of Toxoplasma, with one of its key dopamine-related genes snipped out. But crazily enough, infection with this mutant parasite still caused the fatal attraction, even though it wasn't raising dopamine levels in the mouse's brain. This result really threw a wrench on the works. It suggests that while dopamine is definitely part of the story, the parasite might not be the simple little dopamine factory everyone thought it was.
And that brings us to our third and maybe most sophisticated suspect. This theory suggests the parasite is playing the long game. It's not attacking the brain directly with damage or chemicals. It's using an indirect route, hormones.
Think of it like this. Instead of storming the command center, the parasite is messing with the communication lines between the body and the brain. It infiltrates other systems to send faulty intel back to headquarters, ultimately tricking the brain into rewiring itself. It's a really clever, indirect approach.
So let's walk through this incredible chain of command. First, the parasite invades the testes, partly because the immune system is less active there. Next, once it's settled in, it causes testosterone production to just go through the roof. All this extra testosterone then travels to the brain, where it triggers something called epigenetic changes, which basically means it's flipping genetic switches on and off without changing the DNA itself. And the absolutely bizarre result, the brain circuits for mating get rewired so that they're now triggered by the smell of a predator. Just wild.
Now, this theory is really elegant, and it has some solid evidence. For example, if you castrate male rats before they get infected, the behavioral change can be prevented. But it has one giant, glaring hole in it. The fatal attraction effect, it's seen in both male and female rodents. So a mechanism that depends so heavily on testosterone and male biology just can't be the complete explanation for what we see happening in females.
So after looking at our three main suspects, where does that leave us? Well, it seems like this is one of those cases where there just isn't one single simple answer. The mystery of the mind-controlling microbe is still very much open. So let's just recap the case file real quick. We have the brain invasion theory, but it's weakened by the fact that the cysts are spread so randomly. Then there's the dopamine disruption theory, which is complicated by that contradictory evidence from the mutant parasites. And finally, the hormone heist theory, which is a fantastic explanation, but only for the males. Each theory has some really good evidence, but each one also has a major flaw.
So the growing consensus among scientists is that we're not looking for a lone gunman here. It's more like a conspiracy. It's highly likely that Toxoplasma uses a multi-pronged attack, combining parts of all three strategies. It might cause a little inflammation, subtly mess with dopamine signals, and tweak hormone levels. And it's the combined effect of all three that leads to this profound change in behavior. The investigation is far from over.
And that leads us to the final and, frankly, pretty unsettling question. About a third of all humans on Earth are chronically infected with Toxoplasma gondii, and most of them have no idea. Now, it's not making us attracted to predators, but research is starting to explore its subtle links to things like changes in our personality, our willingness to take risks, and even certain mental health conditions. So if this parasite can pull off such a precise and complex plot in a rodent, what kind of long-term subtle story is it writing inside of us?